By the time this video is released, the final battle should be in full swing or have just been decided. Have you heard of Bexbach, Bielstein, Brokelow, Biemelstadt, Waldeck or Wagenfeld? No? These are villages, districts or towns with populations ranging from around 1,000 to a maximum of 18,000. But over the course of the year or during individual events, thousands of LARPers join them. You've never heard of LARP?
Welcome to YD. Why do Germans do things the way they do?
Alright then, what is LARP? LARP is short for live action roleplay, and we use this abbreviation in Germany too. Where does LARP come from? Let's start with history. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, a masterpiece of fantasy literature that has sold over 150 million copies. Most people are probably familiar with Peter Jackson's film adaptation. But even before that, people were already interested in the subject matter. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson from the USA, for example, who invented and sold the first pen and paper role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons in 1974. Over the decades, more and more have been added, and the best known in Germany is probably Das Schwarze Auge, the Dark Eye. How does a tabletop role-playing game work? Pen and paper refers to a pen and a piece of paper. You write down everything important and have a character sheet listing abilities, skills, and hit points. Several people gather around a table. We have a game master or dungeon master and several players. The game master knows the fantasy story, for example, a quest to obtain or destroy a magical artifact. The players have created their own characters within the framework of the rules, let's say an elven wizard, a halfling thief, a dwarven cleric, and a human barbarian warrior. And what these characters can or cannot do is written on their character sheets. The game master now describes what the characters see, smell, and hear, and the players imagine themselves acting out the story, perhaps like this. No sooner you have reached the edge of the forest than the sun sets and mist rolls in. It is cold and damp, and then it starts to rain. The torches are almost extinguished by the rain, and even the dwarfs' and elves' dark vision is reaching its limits in the cold mist. After an hour, even your cloaks are soaked through and cling coldly to the wet cloth. You still haven't found a place to camp when you spot a light in the distance. As you get closer, you see that it is a small hut and a candle burning in the upper window. What do? Now it's up to the player. The dwarf might examine what the hut is made of, stone or wood, and whether any dwarfs might be living inside. The elf might try to cast a spell to unlock the door, while the thief is perhaps already fiddling with the lock using lockpicks. And the impatient barbarian might be taking a run up to kick the door down, when the dwarf changes his mind, knocks, and calls out, "Hello! Sorry to disturb you so late." What might lie behind the door? An old lady offering the heroes a bowl of warm soup? Horde of bandits who are very annoyed that someone has found them and is now disturbing them? Only once the door is open we'll know, and the characters must act again. Whether a perception or history check is successful, or whether an attack lands and how much damage is inflicted on the door or the opponent, it is determined by rolling the dice. Depending on the system, you'll need standard 6-sided dice, but there are also 4-sided, 8-sided, 10-sided, 12-sided, and 20-sided dice, even 100-sided ones, though I personally prefer 10-sided dice. Over time, the other players began to bring more and more atmosphere to our perhaps weekly gaming events. The crisps were no longer in bags, but in wooden bowls. The drinks were no longer in plain glasses, but in jugs. Perhaps there were candles on the table with imaginative or medieval music playing in the background, and some people decorated the room with sturdy chairs, wall hangings, and so on. After a few years in the USA or a good 20 in Germany, the players thought that perhaps they could experience the whole thing properly. Surely they could head out into the woods and find their way, perhaps to the ruins of an old castle. The first commercial LARP in Germany was Drakon 1 in 1992. There's even a film about it. It was just over 30 years ago, after all. From then on, groups and clubs sprang up all over Germany, traveling to such events and organizing them themselves. The principle is similar to the tabletop role-playing game. The game master or masters come up with a story to be acted out. Let's say a mayor summons heroes because a village is under threat from orcs. But beyond the story itself, all you need is the village, perhaps a cluster of huts that can be hired or a campsite. And it's not just to say there are enemies, you'll need villagers and orcs. And this is where we come to a distinction between two terms. The heroes are the fellow players who come to the event and do not know the plot, but who have devised and equipped their own characters and are free to decide whether they want to break down a locked door, conjure it open, pick the lock, or simply knock. These are the players with the player characters, devised by the players themselves. The villagers and orcs are assigned a character by the game master. They are to be told whether they are brave or cowardly, a good fighter or easy prey. These are the players with the non-player characters, who were not conceived by the player but by the game master. The NPC player often have to play several roles. If the village is raided by the orcs on the first evening, many villagers are likely already in bed and asleep. This allows the players to quickly shed the villagers' robes, grab an orc mask and attire, and then launch an attack. Depending on how long and complex the plot is intended to be, it may be that you simply need to find the orc camp to defeat them there once and for all. However, it may also be that someone in the village has stolen an orc artifact and the orcs simply want it back, or that another power has forced or paid them to attack the village. This could be the start of a campaign spanning several events centered on the village and the evil forces behind. If the organizers have less equipment, the orcs might be replaced by bandits. That way you can save on the masks. Or if you want to make it more menacing, they could be undead or demons. There are no limits to the imagination there. And we wouldn't be German if we didn't have an umbrella organization for live role playing and originally various rule books that define the game. The first, perhaps best known of these is Dragons, which was still very close to the rules of a pen and paper role playing game. For each day of play, a character gained around 7 experience points and could use these to acquire skills, meaning that as a character accumulated more and more con days, that is, days spent at an event, they became increasingly experienced and powerful. The experience points applied to the character, not the player. Many players have devised more than one player character and are sometimes the heroic knight and sometimes the devious necromancer. The Heidelberger Dilettanten had a set of rules where you even carried magic points and hit points on strips of paper and had to discard the corresponding number after every hit or spell. Nowadays, games are increasingly played according to the DK wie die DK principle. Du kannst, was du darstellen kannst. You can do what you can portray. A good source for upcoming LARP events was, and still is, Thilo Wagner's LARP calendar. It went online in 1995 and had 45 events listed at the time. In the years that followed, there were between 120 and 200 events per year, and in 2000 the number suddenly rose to 380. For August 2026 alone, 32 events are listed, and 10 for this December, including the famous Twilight New Year Eve LARP at Bielstein Castle. The youth hostel at Bielstein Castle is perhaps the most frequently used castle for LARP events in Germany. I've been there a dozen times myself. Conversely, the LARP village of Bogenwald near Wagenfeld was founded and built specifically for this purpose. as well as LARP events, photo shoots, and music videos are also filmed there. On a former military training ground in the Saarland near Bexbach, a site has been established aimed at youth groups for camping trips and LARPers. It has been aptly named Utopia. Conversely, LARP organizers often rent small campsites, which have the advantage that the entire infrastructure is already in place. Every weekend in Germany, there are several events with between 25 and 250 participants. Some last one day, these are often called LARPy, whilst others run from Friday afternoon to Sunday lunchtime and are then considered a proper con. There are adventure events such as the scenario mentioned above for our glorious heroes, sometimes set in an old mine, where the focus is often on dwarves and drow. There are diplomacy cons, where the focus is more on discussing the future direction of the politics in a participating LARP nation. Sometimes a tavern is open for an evening, or guests are invited to a ball where the focus is on dancing. But what if you want to take it up a notch beyond 500 players, perhaps 1,000 or even 10,000? It is said that the conquest of Mittelerde reached 10,000 the best year. The Dachenfest has always had around 5 to 6,000 participants, and in recent years the conquest had also had around 6 to 7,000. Giving the scale a standard campsite or castle isn't enough. This is why we've moved to Brokelow Manor for conquest, or to the Quast, a hill near Diemelstadt, and since this year to Waldeck for the Drachenfest. Both events have now been running for over 20 years. The first Drachenfest was organized by the former LARP club Vinland e.V. at the Nürburgring in 2001. From 2006 until 2025, it took place on the Quast near Diemelstadt. Cows or sheep usually graze on the hill. On the meadows of the Brokelow Manor, it is usually horses. But once a year, preparation begin for several weeks, and military camps and imaginative town spring up on the meadows. Conquest always follows in the week after the Drachenfest, and this is where it gets interesting for people from all over the world. If you were a LARPer, you might just travel to Germany for 2 weeks and take part in 2 huge LARP events. I've already struck up conversations with people from Australia and Japan, not mentioned from all over Europe. At most events, participants quickly switch to English when someone who doesn't speak German joins the group. The 2 major events take place one after the other. First the Drachenfest from Tuesday to Sunday, and then the Conquest from Wednesday to Sunday. For both, it's possible to arrive as early as Sunday for an additional charge. There are even companies that will provide you with a tent so you don't have to take one on the plane. So all you need are your costumes. I also attended both events back to back in 2023. It is quite exhausting, although we were able to sleep, do our washing, and recharge our batteries at home from Sunday evening to Wednesday morning. But what is it actually like? Well, the scenarios are like those in The Lord of the Rings, an imaginative take on the Middle Ages. Although you'll sometimes come across warriors from ancient Greece or musketeers, so let's take a very broad view on the Middle Ages. People live and sleep in tents and wear clothing appropriate to their character. Cooking is often done over an open fire, basically everything that was fun as a child. At this point, I'd like to make a distinction. LARP is a closed event with no spectators, so it's not a theater. If you want to watch, you have to take part. Some might think it looked like Middle Ages, but that's not quite right. Of course, bows and arrows, swords and shields have a medieval feel to them, but the Middle Ages actually existed, whereas the LARP stories are made up. Anyone setting up and running a camp at a medieval fair would fit right into a fantasy LARP simply based on the clothing. The reverse isn't necessarily true. If we then consider reenactors who portray a specific area and region of the Middle Ages, they would naturally fit into such a LARP too, but the reverse is absolutely not the case. LARP isn't cosplay either. Anyone portraying an orc from Mordor or a tiefling from Baldur's Gate at a cosplay event would also fit into a fantasy LARP, but whether the costume is suitable for everyday use to be worn for several days and possibly exposed to blows in combat is another matter. The clothing at Fantasy LARP shouldn't look modern, but whether it looks like it does in the film Dungeons and Dragons, the TV series Game of Thrones, or like the early Middle Ages in England, the late Middle Ages in France, or the Rococo period in Italy, that depends on what the person wants to portray. As I said, elves meet orcs and Spartans meet pirates of the Caribbean, and there are knights and thieves, rangers and druids, wizards and witches running about, sometimes even vampires, demons, and ghosts. Incidentally, there isn't just fantasy LARP, but also vampire LARP, which is taking place right now, though featuring vampires, their minions, and their enemies. Gaslight is set in the 19th century. Every now and then, there are also Western LARP or post apocalyptic LARPs, which are set in the futuristic apocalypse. Particular popular variant is often a zombie LARP. A zombie outbreak has occurred, and whilst almost all players start out playing their own character, they are likely to be struck, bitten, and infected as the event progresses, and by the end, the question is who has survived unscathed. These kinds of events are usually for over 18s only, as they contain numerous horror elements and often no safe place to sleep. The major events, Conquest and Drachenfest, have no age restrictions, though you are often only allowed to take part in the large-scale battles from the age of 14 or 16. Younger participants are at too great a risk in the physical jostling. There are also events specifically aimed at children and teenagers. At Conquest, there's even an in-time nursery. So it's an event the whole family can join. Oh yes, in time and out time. The journey by car, pitching the tent and checking in are all out time. You are not playing yet. You chat as normal and greet anyone you know. You might take a photo on your mobile phone or ring home to say you've arrived safely. Once the game has started, everything is in time. Now the character determines what is said and done. Someone who had just been greeting a friend may, as a dwarf, now hate the goblin being portrayed and want nothing more than to slay him. During the game, you try to stay in time and refrain from anything disruptive until the game ends. You get changed again, pack up, and head home. There are also events where only adults are allowed, either because the organizers don't want children because they don't fit into the scenario, or because the protection of minors cannot or should not be guaranteed. After all, the game can be played deliberately with horror elements, or it might be intended to be a bit sexy at a time. You shouldn't be prudish anyway, depending on the event and venue. There may be separate or mixed gender showers. I've experienced this at 3 events already. Sometimes this is intentional, for example, at large events where families want to have a shower, and depending on whether the father wants to shower with his daughter or the mother with her son under the waterfalls, as it calls in game, it doesn't always work out. Apart from the additional shower row deliberately set up at events such as the Drachenfest, I've otherwise came across this at smaller event where there was just one shower room. Once you've discovered this hobby for yourself, there's plenty to do away from the event as well. Either you have plenty of money to buy the costume, or you sew and refine it yourself. You write your own backstory and get together with friends to breathe life into the land you live in. The IG Mittellande consists of various groups and clubs that run their own lands, which are situated on a continent called Mittelland that looks a bit like Europe. Over the years, conquest of Mythodea has also populated its own continent, Mythodea, and has been exploring their neighboring continent of Sarkhan for the past 2 years. Then there are the southern lands and the eastern lands, and so on and so forth. Oh yes, the weapons are harmless, of course. A glass fiber core rod wrapped in foam and then nicely painted. You can make these yourself, but not many people do that anymore as there are now good, affordable professional suppliers. You can get a beginner's sword for €50, Whilst my friend knitted his own chainmail 20 years ago, that is, he wove the individual chain links together and pressed them into shape, you can now buy it cheaply as well as parts for plate armor. This armor generally only withstands LARP weapons and isn't suitable for exhibition combat. But when you're standing in the final battle alongside thousands of others, whether at Drachenfest or Conquest, there's bound to be a crush, and that alone can cause someone to fall or get a bruise. To ensure this, the game master are on hand to make sure everything don't get too rough or too intense. It's a game, and hits should be felt but shouldn't leave a bruise or hurt. For this reason, striking the head, neck, or genitals is generally prohibited. The game masters are usually volunteers. Even when large events are organized by commercial providers, they wouldn't work without an army of volunteers who write plots or act as points of contact. The player of player characters pay the highest fee, and the tickets are the most expensive, while the tickets for NPC players are discounted. After all, they often cannot freely decide what to do, when, and how. And even within a camp, there are often volunteers responsible for setting it up, ensuring everyone has a place, making prior arrangements with the organizers regarding what may or may not be set up or offered in the camp, and who sometimes have to operate half in time and half out time to ensure the camp is in place on the large meadow for the final battle at the right time so that fellow players don't miss it out. Furthermore, at large-scale events, paramedics and often even doctors must be on site, and the local volunteer fire brigade is on standby as the risk of fire is higher with so many tents and campfires. I've seen firsthand at 3 events so far just how quickly a tent catches fire. No one was ever hurt, and the fire didn't spread either. In all cases, the cause was a gas-powered fridge, not a campfire. A fridge like that shows that even when role playing, you don't want to do without a certain level of luxury and chilled drinks. If you fancy giving it a go, just find a small event nearby and ask if they could do with a beginner. The organizers are always on the lookout for NPCs and will have the necessary kit. And if you are not really into camping, just look for an event held in a house or youth hostel. Perhaps a friend might even take you along to a tavern LARP for an evening. I enjoy it, maybe you will too. And then you'll know where Bexbach, Bielstein, Brokono, and Waldeck are. And if you head north from Waldeck, you might pass through Diemelstadt and end up swarming the McDonald's there on the Sunday after Drachenfest. You might end up waiting 40 minutes for your food, but that gives you plenty of time to have a chat with other players again. Remarks, additions, and comments in the comments. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.